Hey everyone. Thank you so much again for taking time to listen to the second episode of the God Bless My Brand podcast. Before we get started, first, I hope you have a drink in hand, whether again it's your wine, your tea, your water, whatever it is. I'm excited to have you, and I again want this to be a space where you can just cool down. There's so much going on in the world, there's so much going on in our lives, and so I think it's just time to take a couple minutes for yourself. So that's the first thing. Second thing, thank you to everyone who supported in however you did, whether you shared it, you sent it to a friend, you listened yourself. I am so incredibly grateful for the support that you guys have shown me. I'm excited to continue this podcast. So if you have topics that you really want to discuss, please let me know. I really want this podcast to be relatable but also impactful for you. So, with that being said, today's episode is entitled, What Are You Solving For? For those of you guys who joined me last week, we talked about what is your why? And we talked about the fact that so many of us can name our dislikes and rattle them off. But when someone asks us, what do we like? Sometimes we stumble. And a lot of us have this incredible gifting, this yearning to a certain area, to a particular group of people, or to a particular topic. But it's hard to understand, what do we do with that? Especially in a scenario like COVID, where so many of the ideas and things that we had maybe going into 2020 are no longer the same. And so today I want to talk about, what are you solving for? So I don't know about y'all, but I loved algebra in high school. Like, it was truly my favorite subject. I love the fact that there was an equation. I love the fact that there was an answer. And if I could just put a pin right there, it's so interesting that I loved algebra because I knew that there was an answer, but a lot of times in life we don't get the answers that we want. We search. If we have a bad breakup, we always want to know why. If we lost our jobs or were laid off, we always want to know why. And sometimes we don't get that why. But in math, sometimes I felt like there was an explanation. Anywho, when I think about algebra, I think about the equation y equals mx plus b. And funny enough, last week we talked about, what is your why. So your why is already solved for. We already know what that is. But I think it's the rest of the equation that trips us up. And for me personally, I know that, I hated geometry because there were all these, it was all these shapes. It was a bunch of stuff I didn't understand. But for algebra, it was always the X for me that was confusing. It was the fact that I understood theoretically what it meant, but I could not understand how I was supposed to get there because I didn't understand the differentials. And I want to break that down in terms of branding today. So, number one, I think it's awesome. Many of you all have incredible dreams, whether it's to start a t-shirt line, or it's to start a nonprofit, or it's to start a business, or it's to solve for cancer, or whatever the case may be. But a lot of times we understand our why. We understand, why we're doing this. We understand why, we're waking up in the morning, and why we're put on earth, or at least we're starting to develop that and really ask those questions. But now it's time to answer the what. It's time to answer not just what am I here for, but what differentiates what I'm doing from what I see. For example, my little sister Miracle, who's absolutely incredible, just started a brand called Black Space Network. And of course, her why is because she was really excited about doing something for Detroit. But her what is to provide and promote the space for Black creatives and entrepreneurs to elevate their brands and networks. She understood that there was not a lot of spaces in Detroit to do that for Black creatives. There are a lot of space in the tech industry for some of our for our white counterparts or for our allies, but not necessarily for Black creatives and for Black entrepreneurs, or for aspiring Black business owners. And so that is what she put together with a couple of her partners, and that is her what. That's what differentiates her from just an event space. So I want you to take the time today, and even in the next couple of seconds, to think about what differentiates you and what differentiates your why. Because I think if you understand what differentiates your why, it's easy to determine what it is that you're solving for. So, for example, I might have mentioned it last week on the podcast, but there are a lot of people with podcasts. There are a lot of people who are talking about branding and business. There are a lot of podcasts on faith, but I started my podcast not only because my why is to empower and embolden God's people, but the second part of it was because I understood it's great to have clientele. It's awesome that people, trust me enough with their businesses or their personal lives or their personal brands. But I also understand that in COVID and in situations where maybe you're just starting out and you're trying to understand what your why is, or how to solve for that why, you may not have the funds to pay me. So I created a podcast to discuss some of the things that I've talked about with my clients and to encourage you on that journey to not quit, but also push you to think beyond, just let me create a business plan. So that's what I'm solving for. I'm solving for the lack of clarity in entrepreneurship, the lack of clarity in our career space. So I want you to ask yourself, what are you solving for? Are you solving for homelessness? Are you solving for there aren't enough black women in C-suite and executive roles? Are you solving for making sure that black women feel loved and feel empowered? Are you solving for black men not being shot down in the street? What is it that you're solving for? Because there's always a problem, but you have to understand what it is, what your solution will be. What is your target? What's your aim? And I think a lot of times in business or even in branding, a lot of people, we forget that part. We forget the what are we solving, and we go straight to, okay, I'm gonna talk to a producer because now I want to be a rapper, now I know all these things. But what's your message? We have a lot of people who are starting t-shirt brands, which are dope. But what would make me want to buy your t-shirt as opposed to someone else's? What are you solving for that they are not? For example, the creator of Toms, not only did he give us very comfortable footwear, but he understood that there were millions of children in other countries who didn't have reliable footwear. And that is what makes people buy Toms over Skechers or over other brands that look really similar to his. But because he had that mission, because he knew what he was solving for, people were excited to buy in. And when you understand what you're solving for, it's a lot easier to tell your story and to brand yourself, because now you're not just selling a product or a service or your experience. If you're going into a career field, you are selling a solution. And I understand, like, a lot of us, I come from a sales background, so I know a lot of us are like, I don't want to sell anything. I'm trying to hit this career goal. I'm trying to, start this. I'm trying to do that. You are always selling in some way, shape, or form, because people want to buy into you. And it's not that you're a piece of property. That's not at all what I'm saying, but you are almost always on. I talked about it last week, but your why is going to be discussed in rooms you're not even in. And if people understand what you're trying to do and what you're solving for, people can bring that into rooms, and that should be evident across all of your platforms. If you want to start a clothing line, I should understand your story of why you wanted to start a clothing line, who your target audience is, and what you hope to achieve. And that should be visible. And I'm not just talking on your website like a sentence. I'm talking what I can feel when I look at the clothing. What your names embody. What does that story mean? There's a woman who I follow on Instagram who has a lipstick and a makeup line. But when I look at all of her lipsticks go back to scripture or some kind of encouragement. And I feel that no matter what, even if I didn't know her story, I'd be like, oh wow, that's a really cool name for it. I wonder what that means. So if you tell your story in a way that makes people wonder, if you tell your story in a way that gets people excited, that's what you're solving for, because then they'll buy in not only to you, but they'll buy into your brand. One of the things we talked about is Y equals MX plus B. So we have our Y, we probably are starting to get our X. One variable that we don't pay too much attention to is the B. And the B for me is the belief part of it. And I'm not just talking belief in Jesus Christ, but I'm talking belief in what you're doing. One of the things that always scares me about this LLC Twitter, LLC culture, is that I think a lot of us are just doing it to do it. because we want to make sure that we want to feel popping. We want to feel like we're on top. We want to feel like we're in our bag, we're in our Birkin, blah, blah, blah. And that's wonderful. And I want that for you too. I want you to have a Birkin. I want you to be a millionaire, a billionaire, a trillionaire. I want you to reach it, but do you believe in what you're about to do? Because people can sense it. People can sense when you don't know what you're solving for. People can sense when you just started a lipstick line just to start one. People can sense when you just started a lash line just to make money. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, because we deserve different sources of income. You absolutely should plan for that. You're not going to have the biggest attachment to everything that you do, but that's my hope, is that you find it. I want you to believe so much in what you're solving for that it brings people to understand more about you, more about your background, that you're paving the way for so many people because of the belief that you had in what you were doing. So I hope that today you take some time to not only think about your why, to not only think about what you're doing, but you also take some time to solve for that be of belief. Understand why you're doing it. Understand what's the impact to you. What's the impact to the community that you're solving for? What's the impact to future generations who are going to look back and say, wow, I'm so proud because she started something that she was passionate about. Wow, I'm so proud because he did it the hard way, he endured. Because the other thing about entrepreneurship or being in a career, or fighting for a role, or becoming a production assistant, or whatever it is that you're looking to do, is that it's a long haul game. Resourceful Reese will be 4 this September, which I'm extremely excited about. But also, it's been a long game. And it's been a game that I've had to reinvent. It's been a game that I've had to really sit down and say, like, bring me back to my why on days where I really didn't want to do anything, when I didn't want to look at a resume, when I frankly didn't want to record a podcast or didn't want to do any of those things. It brought me back to my why. It brought me back to what I was actually solving for, because that's what propelled me. It was the belief I had that people really need, that not that people needed me, because I really believe that what I'm doing is just a small piece of the puzzle, but I had such a belief that people were meant to get their dream jobs. I had such a belief that people were meant to launch their dreams, whether it was a business or a movie or whatever it was. I had such a belief in them that I knew I couldn't quit. And so that's my hope for you, is that you have such a belief for what God has called you to do, that you go forward even in times of struggle, even in times where you don't understand what the heck is going on and why. My hope is that you understand what you're solving for, and that belief carries you through. Well, I'm excited for you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I can't wait to see you soon.